Although it's been over 5 years since the Iraq War began back in March of 2003, the war still is on the list of things that Americans say are pressing problems for the country and issues they will take into account in voting for president in November of 2008.
On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
Just after forces from the U.S. and Great Britain first invaded Iraq back in March of 2003, Gallup asked Americans a fundamental question, a question that we had asked at other times in other wars, such as in Korea and Vietnam. The wording is important. Quote, in view of the developments since we first sent our troops to Iraq, do you think the United States made a mistake in sending troops to Iraq or not? End quote. In that initial USA Today Gallup poll conducted March 24-25, 2003, just as the war was getting underway, support for the war was quite strong. 23% of Americans felt that it was a mistake, while the overwhelming majority, 72% of Americans at that point in March of 2003, said that it was not. But events on the ground began to unfold in different ways as the war progressed, including the well-publicized capture and eventual rescue of Jessica Lynch from Iraqi insurgents. And with U.S. forces entering Baghdad and taking control of the city, Americans were feeling pretty good about the decision to invade Iraq as March turned into April back in 2003.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
As the war progressed, moments of success, such as the capture of Saddam Hussein in December of 2003, were quickly overshadowed by the torture scandal at Abu Ghraib prison the following April. Shortly after that particular scandal made the headlines, it was clear that American public opinion was shifting. By May of 2004, 44% of Americans said it was a mistake to send troops to Iraq, 54% said it was not. And by the summer of 2004, a milestone of sorts was reached. For the first time, a majority of Americans said that the war in Iraq was a mistake. On November 17, 2005, Congressman John Murtha of Pennsylvania made national headlines when he called for U.S. troops to withdraw from Iraq. Public opinion by that point had shifted again, with 52% of Americans saying it was a mistake to have sent troops to Iraq. More than a year later, after a long, drawn-out trial, Saddam Hussein was sentenced to death by hanging on November 5, 2005. And just 3 days later, Donald Rumsfeld resigned as Secretary of Defense. The American public increasingly seemed to grow war-weary. The release of a report by the Iraq Study Group on December 6, 2006, concluded that, quote, the situation in Iraq is grave and deteriorating, end quote, and, quote, U.S. forces seem to be caught in a mission that has no foreseeable end, end quote. Clearly, the American public did not like what they heard. In a December 8-10 USA Today Gallup poll, 53% said that sending troops to Iraq was a mistake, 45% said it was not. By January of 2007, President George W. Bush announced that an additional 20,000 troops would be sent in a surge effort to help Iraq quell the growing insurgency and stabilize the country. A month later, General David Petraeus officially took charge of forces in Iraq. By the time he delivered his report on the Iraq War to Congress in September of 2007, the percentage of Americans who thought that sending troops to Iraq was a mistake had risen to 58%. March of 2008 marked the 5th anniversary of the start of the long Iraq War. In a Gallup poll in April of 2008, 63% of Americans said the war was a mistake, and that was higher than said the same thing about the Vietnam War at any time while that war was still being waged. By the summer of 2008, the importance of the Iraq War was to some degree being overshadowed for many Americans by the economy and the high price of gasoline. The Iraq War still, however, remains an issue in the presidential campaign, and time will tell to what degree the Iraq War will help determine who becomes the next president of the United States.